I'm Gary Severance with the group, and we can history through digital dentistry with Ivoclar, with Planmeca, E4D Technologies, and it's so exciting to see new technologies come out. This morning, though, as Fran said, is what we're going to talk about is a premium photopolymerization of resin for denture teeth called Trusana, distributed by Zahn. And it's a very unique position in dentistry of what we're going through now, and you can probably realize that even LMT has talked about the increase fivefold of digital scanners, and that's kind of the domino that kicks off the whole digital workflow. And then when you go to the ADA and their group, you see 50% of that area is looking at or already has digital scanners, another big domino that it is starting to be the tipping point that dental practices have digital scanners. So we can see this growing and growing. But you know that too, when you look at different areas, printing is the way to go. Accelerating faster than any digital technology we've seen in dentistry. But it's also key to note that dentistry has a cycle, and several in the room have experienced that. We started with pressing, and the technology was great, but then we had to refine the materials to catch up to it and make better and better materials, aka Empress to Emax. We saw the same thing when milling came out. We accelerated to find materials that take advantage of that technology. And we're doing the same thing now when we look at the printing, and you'll see different materials, but that's what brings us today to talk about Trusana, is really an approach to improving dental materials for a technology that's really already proven. Now, I'm very excited because the panel we have is unlike any other, I think. We have the inventor, we have the manufacturer, and we have the end user to share their experiences, their history, and what they've seen throughout the process. And as Fran mentioned, we have Dr. Steven Sadowsky here, past president of this Prosthodontic Society, board certified prosthodontist, now a professor at UOP. Representing the manufacturer, we have a very young looking Jim Swartout, who's for 20 years been the president of Meyerson, and we'll get to hear his story and what attracted him to take this in an R&D development. And finally, Christopher Kabot, a digital wizard, but also VP of Research and Development for Affordable Care. So let's get started because all of these opinions are great. The first presentation, or actually answer to a question, is typically when you look for an invention or you start to think of how can I solve a problem, that's what stimulates creating a new product or a new idea. It overcomes a limitation. So I'd like to ask Dr. Swartout, or I'm sorry, not Dr. Sadowsky. Eventually you'll get there, Jim. Dr. Sadowsky.
Luckily I'm so young.
He just received an honorary doctorate.
What was the inception and how do you go about inventing a product? Dr. Sadowsky.
Okay, thank you very much,
Sure.
Gary. So just as a little background, I was thinking about progress and the fact that in 1965, Gordon Moore had made a prediction that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit would double every 2 years, so-called these little microchips. And that prediction really became emblematic of the whole semiconductor industry, as well as computer technology. But that promise hasn't suffused other fields, especially ours. And in fact, when I look at, I'm going to put the next slide on, okay? When I look at the evolution, at least over the last 15 years, of material science for prosthetic materials, it's been pretty desultory and slow. And I say that with two hats on. One as a clinician, and I've been monitoring my own mechanical complications, and one as an academic that is conversant on the literature that's topical to this. So let me start at the trailhead 15 years ago of my concern and my desire to want to make a shift, a quantum shift. And that is that I was confronted, and I'm sure others of you have been, John, I'm sure you've had this experience, you have a 5-year recall on a patient that has a fixed implant complete denture. And you see this wholesale wear. And okay, I knew what I had to do, which is do a so-called retread, which is really a complete occlusal reconstruction. At the time we used a composite material. And I had no way to promise the patient that there was going to be a different trajectory in another 5 years. And I began to look at the literature, which I was discomforted and comforted at the same time. I was discomforted by the fact that this is going on everywhere, but at least feeling like I'm not an outlier. And when Purcell discussed his conclusions, which was basically after 5 years, there's a 50 times chance that you're going to have to retread your prosthesis then after 2 years. That was an indictment in terms of our work when a patient is investing in that kind of complete reconstruction and finding out it has a 5-year limitation. So I went on to look at the literature a little bit more, and it was even more, I would say, concerning. And that is that even the definitive prostheses were having really high complication rate. So we used to brag about the fact that these had really high survival rates, and they do. Prosthetic survival is high, but the success is really low. For instance, only about 8 to 15% of these would be able to stay in the mouth without some complication over 10 years. And these were 2 systematic reviews that supported that. So this is quite an indictment on this procedure. And it's really a material issue. And then lastly, probably the biggest offender was the provisional of the all-on-4, which was the procedure or the prosthesis that we put in immediately after placing the implants during this period where we're wanting to have a stable integration period, right? And then find out that 60% of them are fracturing. And you know that also can jeopardize the integration. I thought to myself, just like, I remember the quote by Edison, which was, if you see a chronic problem in your field, then think of a way to fix it. And my thought was, I can't do that, but maybe I can find someone who can. And I called my good friend Howard Landesman, who was Dean of Colorado at that time. And I said, Howard, do you know any polymer scientists that I could contact so that we could begin this journey? And this was 15 years ago. So we can find a material that's going to hold up under the duress of the functioning that we have for our patients. And he said, well, yes, I do. I just hired a guy who I have a lot of confidence in, and this was Jeff Stansberry. And as it turns out, when I looked at his litany of awards, many of them were for inventions. And I said, we need a revolutionary quantum change, and that's the man. And as it turns out, he has 35 patents, one of which is now with Trusana. So what I wanted to do is to show you some comparisons of our material with methyl methacrylate, which is the 90-year-old that's still hanging around for some reason, and then also with some other additive subtractive processes. When you compare Trusana, as far as the flexural strength and also the modulus, to, say, methyl methacrylate, the flexural strength is double, okay? And the modulus is 3 times, okay? So that's impressive. And then when you compare it to other polymers, there was a study by Wesseman, which is fascinating because he took a conventional material, he took a couple of the subtractive materials, CAD/CAM materials, and then additive materials, and compared it to each other. And Trusana exceeded every one of those. So now we're at a point where we want to do some clinical trials. And at UOP, I started a clinical trial, now almost a year ago, I wanted to look at the wear of Trusana, or actually this UDMA material. It happened to be CAD-CAM that we were using at the time rather than printed. And I wanted to compare it with Fenari's, because Fenari's too is considered to be kind of the high tier in terms of wear resistance, right? And so I thought, why don't we do a split mouth, but not right and left. Let's do maxillomandible, because if you did right and left, if one side was actually holding up the other side, it would be a confounding factor, right? So what did we do? We had on the posterior maxilla, Fenari's 2. On the mandible, we had our experimental polymer, okay, the UDMA. And now we've had it in the mouth for over 6 months, and we're going to be using GeoMagic software in order to find out which one wears the most. Now, we have a pretty good idea, a prediction on this. Why? Because we've submitted this independently to Midwestern University, and John Mitchell has done a wear study using zirconia antagonists and found out, and this blew my mind, that it beat, Kensen. Well, that didn't blow my mind, but it beat Kensen and it beat Fenari's, but it also beat lithium disilicate. It was more wear resistant than lithium disilicate. So that was impressive, especially since it didn't come out of any of Dr. Swartout's work. Here is the study at UOP. And so what we did is we scanned the denture at the time of placement. And then 6 months later, we scanned it again, and then we'll use this GeoMagic software in order to determine what wore the most, the Fenari's or our material, Trusana material. And then what I was able to do is to develop a multi-center study with graduate programs in both Loma Linda and USF, and we're also working with Avi at University of Connecticut. So we've already done 3 of these Trusana FICDs, immediate load. And remember, we are wanting to rectify this problem for the provisional FICD, because that's where we're seeing those fractures. And so we have this on board at Loma Linda. We also have it on board at UCSF, where they have completed these Trusana 3D printed prostheses. And lastly, in my practice, I delivered this Trusana prosthesis for this patient for an all-on 5. And this is just a sequence for you that you can see. And personally, I have an N of 1, but we're building, okay? And I can tell you that the patient was happy, and happy for us to share this with her. She gave us a consent. But impressive is the fact that finally our material science is catching up with our need. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, you can pass it to Jim. And a clarification, when you plug a Mac in, don't plug it through the adapter. So the power.
No,
Sure.
No questions.
Sure.
Those metal appliances that you showed that is that printed as a monoblock, meaning it's all Trusana, or is it just the teeth and then
Okay, so great question. So what these...
Maybe repeat the question if they
Oh,
don't.
yeah. So he wanted to know whether it was a monoblock or whether we printed the base and then maybe bonded on the teeth. So this was printed in a monoblock, but we used Gradia in order to color the matrix.
Great. Sure.
So
Yeah.
usually with the PMMA appliance, the strength over time has to do with water absorption.
Yes.
And I'm wondering with specific to this material.
Yeah, so why don't we go back to that slide that he did not let me show? Okay?
Which one?
You go back. Next. There you go. So can you see what the water absorption is, water uptake?
It's really good.
About 0.33%.
We'll touch on it later too.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
touch on that later. But that's a very important question.
Yep.
Just to add on that, it's a good question. Just to add on it, Gary, if I may, it's not just that it absorbs little water, it's what does water do to it, right?
It actually enhances it.
And first generation polymers, the reason so many labs looked at them as temporary, I'm not talking about models, right? Model printing is proven in what labs are printing, which is why dental is the largest 3D printing industry in the world, right? Because of models, for clear aligners, for crown and bridge. But what the water does to materials that are supposed to be permanent is a different story. That first generation, they were hydrophilic, and it actually weakened the underlying polymer structure. And you saw that evident why in a very short period of time. Interesting thing about Trusana is its low water absorption, which is lower than denture teeth we've been making since the 1960s. When the little bit of water that does come in actually helps to condition the polymer. And we can see it in 3-point bending tests, because instead of actually reaching fracture, the bars actually fold under themselves. So it's an interesting new boundary where all of a sudden we're pushing the frontiers of elasticity and plasticity. And now we're in the upper right part of the quadrant where you've got a material that takes a huge amount of force, but it doesn't fail. It will actually deform before it fails. Absolutely critical in the mouth. What's sacred in the mouth? Don't have anything break, right? Nothing the patient's gonna ingest, inhale, bad. So that's the remarkable thing about the plastic. Water actually slightly conditions it. That's a superb question.
So that's why I gave him the doctorate, the honorary doctorate. It sounded very good. Thanks, Jim.
You can still take it away later.
Yeah, that's right. It's only on the stage. The questions we have, too, you get a great invention, and it looks promising, but we all know it has to test in the mouth, and it has to be long-term, so the clinical studies. So then a manufacturer may come and take it on board to do more R&D, to validate it, and to run through all the government agencies that has to be done to get it to you as the end user. Jim, can you speak a little bit about that experience with Trusana?
Yeah, it's been a complete reinvention of a 100-year company. Steve came to me, honestly, right in the depths of the Great Recession when all of us were trying to figure out where the bottom was. So this is 2008, 2009. And he gave me a phone call and said, we have this new polymer, we're very excited about it. I'm sure you've all heard the analogy, if the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when you've been making denture teeth for 100 years, I'm like, we'll make denture teeth out of it. Well, we tried to put that into a 1960s manufacturing process. And we spent a lot of time, he and I had a lot of breakfast at the Chicago midwinter meeting and not a lot of progress. That's the way that R&D goes. And then I'd say we reached an inflection point where we were together having breakfast at the Swiss Hotel, and I said, how about 3D printing? Aha! So we pivoted, Gary, to 3D and then have really taken off since. And look, that's been the promise of digital dentures, is additive manufacturing. I would say right now, I feel like we finally have the chance to fulfill the promise. It's not about the printers. The printers are accurate, they're affordable, they're consistent. We've seen enormous progress in printing. The holy grail has been, give us tougher materials, give us aesthetic materials. So it wasn't, as Steve so appropriately said, when he first brought me the resin, the material, it wasn't about making another 3D resin. That's the last thing the world needs. It was solving a serious clinical problem. No one questioned, Meyerson at one point was owned by Nobel Industries, so we were part of Nobel Pharma. There's no question, all of us remember, or at least those of us over 40, remember when even implant survival was in question, right? In the early days of Dr. Brandemark. Well, that's been long since confirmed, very high survival rate. Why do we hold the prosthesis that's on top of those implants and think it's acceptable they fail 20% of the time? It's not, and it was basically a question of polymer chemistry. That's the problem we were trying to solve.
Yeah, great. And the process you go through as a manufacturer, number of years that it takes from the ingenuity of actually creating something to take into the market.
Yeah, it's, what I've said to our team before is just because you're around 100 years, if you're not evolving with your customers, why should you be around in 100 months? So I feel like every manufacturer needs to think like a startup, which is what we do. And we continue to make more teeth than ever. We make CAD/CAM discs, but all of us see the potential of additive manufacturing. I don't think one 100% replaces the other, even though you could promise that. What I see is dental labs doing a remarkable job of incorporating standard procedures, reductive manufacturing and milling, additive manufacturing. I think labs have done an incredible job of adapting new technology. And as a manufacturer, we just have to be wherever they want to be.
Yep, great. It's the Gretzky, yeah.
Respond to that. Well, I remember telling Jeff Stansberry that it took Branamark 30 years to develop osseointegration, and we're at the 15-year point. And he turned to me and said, "That's no comfort to me, Steve."
Sure. Great. And Jim, I think you may have just a couple, but I think we know we have a Trusana booth there, and the literature is listed there, these properties as well, when we go through it, and some beautiful cases to show and share with you as well. I think moving on to the next step is once you have the product itself, once a manufacturer checks all the boxes, now it's time to put it in mouths. And we have Chris Kabot here to talk to you a little bit as an end user, what Affordable Care is doing and how it's making an impact, if you would, Chris, on that position as well.
Sure. No, Chris? I appreciate it. First things first, thank you guys for having me on the panel. Dr. Sadowsky, you're a legend. It's nice to be sitting up here with you. And obviously for us nerds in the biochemistry space, your team in Colorado has created something very, very interesting. And I've been fortunate enough to work in the 3D printing industry my entire career for the most part. When I was in university, before I graduated college, we invented one of the first real big 3D printing surgical programs for large craniomaxillofacial cases. And one of the first cases I ever had to work on was a child that actually was in the Ukraine. He had a disease called Apert syndrome. So Apert syndrome is a disease where we all have cranial sutures. It's what allows our bones to grow with our insides. And unfortunately, Dennis wasn't able to have his skeletal system grow. And he was at risk of, it was a fatal, he wasn't gonna make it. We were able to raise close to $150,000 to get him over to the US to provide really a life-saving surgery that was only possible because of the technology that we had invented, which was really a way to 3D print out his anatomy and actually we figured out a way to take really the CT scan and turn it into an actual model so that when you cut into it, the bone density matched the bone density of him. And the big thing that really helped us plan all this out, because it was very, very complicated surgery, it was 3D printing. It's what allowed us to really help save his life. And we were able to, if you've ever seen distractor surgery before, it's no joke. I mean, those halos that you see people wear, those steel beams go into the bones. We click it forward, pretty much a predetermined route, and we pre-planned everything with 3D printing, or with digital technology, and we're able to make it actionable with the 3D printing technology. So after the surgery, his mom came up, gave me a big hug, and I was like sold. I thought this technology was really what I wanted to dedicate my career to, because I think as technicians, as clinicians, at the end of the day, we really want to provide a better quality of life for people. And this technology is going to allow us to do that, but also do it at an affordable rate. So for those of you that don't know affordable dentures and implants, oops, let me go back one. So Affordable Care, we are the largest tooth replacement DSO in the market today. We have serviced over 8 million patients. Last year, we did roughly over 1 million dentures that we produced. We have the largest share of producing dentures in the US today. We employ over 1,000 technicians. Rodney and Keith are in the back over there, have been working for us for over 20 years and have gone from being technicians at the bench to leading a team of 1,000 technicians to deploy Affordable Care at scale. So for us, it's not just about implementing digital and hacking stuff together to provide a better product. We need to do this at scale. So it's not just trying to come up with a 3D printer and a material to produce something. We need to do this at a very, very large scale. So how do we evaluate these different denture materials, these different denture technologies? I was very fortunate in my past to be part of the team that brought the first ever FDA cleared denture to market back in 2017, and those materials were horrific. It was a great proof of concept, but we were never able to keep the chemistry consistent. The water absorption rate was ridiculous, and just to try and keep or print a pink denture, we'd have to sit there and shake a bottle for roughly an hour, try and get it mixed up before we could actually try and print something. We learned really over the last 3 years at Affordable, we've done a lot of digital pilots and testing throughout our network, how do we evaluate these materials? After sending out countless surveys to our technicians, our clinicians, and to our patients, I think at the end of the day, we came down to these 3 key metrics that we try to look for in a good denture material. First things first is aesthetics. The conventional 3D printing materials have lacked aesthetics. The bases typically are far too translucent. The teeth are typically far too opaque. We need to flip that around. We need teeth to be translucent. We need the bases to be opaque. So we were really struggling with aesthetics with the first generation of printed materials. The best use case for 3D printing across the board, even with the predicate and first generation materials, is absolutely going to be fit. We've done lots and lots of research on understanding how fit correlates, well, how accuracy of the Intaglio surface correlates to a well-fitting denture. So after every denture that we produce in a central process location, we do a quick quality control scan, which you see on the screen here. Our metric on really if a case is a go or no-go is to make sure that 100% of those data points are within 200 microns of their normal. Now, that's a pretty easy spec to meet, right, Doc? I would say we should hope that we should be able to hit 200 microns in overall dimensional accuracy. But really, we're shooting to try and get as accurate as we can be at 100 micron overall dimensional accuracy. Most of the materials, especially Trusana, we see prints very accurate. We're seeing 95% plus at 100 micron accuracy. So that's a very good spec to meet. We know that this material, as we print it, it's consistent, it's accurate, it's going to fit in the mouth. And then finally, it's fracture resistance. With the first generation of printed materials, and I'm guilty as charged in bringing some of these to market, they would not last a long time. We saw fracture rate.
Wasn't planned obsolescence?
Planned obsolescence, yes, I love it, I love it. We saw with the first generation of printed materials that we really started using at scale. I'm not going to name any names of some of these materials. However, the first generation of these printed materials, we saw almost a 20% remake rate after 6 months. A lot of that, I believe, is definitely due to porosity. I think a lot of this is due to porosity. First generation printed materials were not good at reflecting water. They were absorbing water. It was making them weak over time. Also was making them less stable over time as well. So we're really looking for materials that allow us to be aesthetic, that fit well and of course print accurately, and can be resistant to fracture. I don't want to have patient brushing their denture and have it fall into the sink and shatter. That happened time and time again with the first generation of printed materials. So very thankful that we have this new generation of printed materials that are coming to market that are allowing us, as a very, very large DSO that puts 5 to 7 year warranties on our dentures, to be comfortable putting our brand behind some of these materials as we deploy digital dentures across our DSO. So this is sort of how I rank digital tooth materials. Today we are talking about the Trusana tooth material specifically. The material that I had the least, I would say, good experience with was the Dentka material. That was the material actually that we had close to a 20% remake rate on. The next dent material is actually the material in 2017 that I helped bring to market specifically for the denture base application. We do have to give Dentka credit. They were the first to ever get both the tooth and the base cleared through the FDA together as a system, where in 2017, when we got the next dent material through the marketplace, we just got the base through, right? So it was actually still pairing that base with carded teeth. And frankly, as we move forward in the digital world, we no longer can be using carded teeth. It rules out a lot of patients as being good qualifiers for a digital denture. So as we evolved, Daytax came out after, shortly after NextDent with a good material. We started seeing that the bases were becoming finally a little bit more opaque instead of being, like a see-through pink plastic, and definitely allowed us to be a little bit more robust. It played nicer with a lot of the reline materials. The 2 predicate materials that came into the marketplace, you could not reline. Some of these materials that you could not get anything to bond to them. So finally, we're starting to see these materials come out where we can still do some of our conventional workflows, do conventional relines, have materials bond to get a known result. Next, I would say we have to give Dentsply Sirona a very big thank you, because they were the first to come to market with finally a high-impact denture-based material that could be 3D printed. Up to this point, all of the denture-based materials have not been high impact. In order to be considered high impact, in my legal team's eyes, we have to at least hit the minimum ISO standard for a denture base. And that minimum ISO standard for a high impact denture base is 900 joules per meter squared. And the predicate materials, Dentka, NextDent, they're about in the 300 range, okay? When Dentsply came out at 1,500 joules per meter squared, that's about the same type of fracture resistance that we're seeing in a milled denture. So finally, do we have printable materials that can rival milled materials in terms of the durability in the mouth? However, they paired it with a carded tooth. It was their fatal flaw. So now we're seeing that Dentsply has come out with new tooth materials, and hopefully they're going to help us evolve. But we're still lacking a high impact, high aesthetic tooth material. That's what we're asking for if we're going to be able to be comfortable in providing a premium digital denture that can rival an analog premium denture. So thankfully, we saw Trusana come to market. Frankly, because of the team they have behind this material, I was quite confident that this was going to be something special. But once we actually started playing with it and seeing how, one, aesthetic this material could be, and then you see really the strength behind it, for me, it's a no-brainer in terms of a good premium denture tooth material. It's what we've been asking for and demanding for a long time. So finally, after 2017, we had the first ever FDA-cleared denture material. 5, 6 years later, finally we have a premium tooth material that we can deploy in a conventional digital denture workflow that we can be comfortable with. So thank you guys for working on that and coming to market with it, because without it, we wouldn't really be able to provide high-end quality prosthetics. Something I always like to highlight other people's work, not just our own through our DSO, because let's be honest, we know we're not the only people on the block here creating dentures. So I saw Blazing Grace on Instagram. She posted this picture of using the Trusana material. I hadn't seen a lot of people using it yet. And I thought it was interesting that she was using it as a monoblock. So when it comes to utilizing this material for a monoblock, what I like to see in this is the fact that we're now able to take a denture, we're using your tooth material that is high end. No longer is this denture just a biofunctional try-in, where we're going to be utilizing it to confirm tooth position and shape. Now we have materials that are true to shade, which is very, very important. Up to this point, most of the tooth materials in the denture space cannot conform to a Vita shade guide whatsoever. This material is certainly closer to that conventional Vita shade guide than we see in predicate materials. And now, because this material also has Class 2 clearance, we can utilize this for really not just a biofunctional try-in. This is something that I'd feel comfortable sending my patient home with, where they can go get case acceptance from their family members. Now, before, with conventional try-in materials, usually they were just a simple shade, not the expectation of matching a true patient shade. So it was really, again, just to confirm tooth position, confirm fit. Well, now we have materials that you can dress up, and it doesn't take too long to dress these materials up, if these slides ever move for me. And you can see that you can put some beautiful composites on here. Grace, are you in here today? Is that you? Okay, I thought I saw you. How long did it take you to put that together? Yeah. Sure. And obviously it's new material for you, so I bet you can speed that up as you move forward. But you look at this material, that's a beautiful monoblock denture that I'd feel comfortable letting a patient go home with. So it's not just a try-in anymore to confirm positions. We actually can have trial dentures or backup dentures because of materials like this. So when you look at a high-quality tooth material, it's not just utilizing it as a high-quality tooth inside of a digital denture. You can use this as a true functional try-in that you could be comfortable sending your patient home with. So for me, materials that can stand the test of time is what we are looking for. Materials that can be aesthetic and can be repeatable and reliable on a multitude of different platforms is what we're looking for when we're trying to choose a good tooth material. So with that, happy to open it up to any questions and answer anything I possibly can for you guys on how we as a user use different 3D additive materials into our DSO. And thank you guys a lot for listening to us today.
So we did our initial wear study at Midwestern, as Steve mentioned, and the actual chemistry we've been working with for 14 years, so we understand how well it performs. But we are admittedly, building out more and more research with more and more institutions. Steve's leading that multi-site study, so you'll see us publishing more and more data as we get it. So look, we would love to have the benefit of 10 years in the mouth. 10 years ago, we were trying to make teeth out of it. So we just don't have the track record. But
Well, we could do an in vitro study, with 1 million cycles, and so we're moving in that direction as well.
Yeah. But we also, a large part of what we do is use as a baseline the materials that we have tons of research on for decades, and then we use all the same variables, the same testing methodology, and we're able to predict out, as Steve mentioned, how this is going to perform. So it's a combination of all of those. That's a great question.
One of the reasons that we felt comfortable choosing Trusana as a premium tooth material is because they also had great data behind this. A lot of these 3D printing materials come to market with no real true data behind them because these companies, and I can speak from experience because I've been on that side of the aisle, trying to get these materials to market, a lot of the additive companies jump quickly and they let the users sort of go through the R&D on their own. What we found with this material is they had great data behind it so that we could feel comfortable deploying it at scale, but also for other applications outside of just simply removable prosthetics. Let's talk about implant-supported overdentures. Implant-supported overdentures are definitely a little bit more prone to failure if they're not supported by a bar. I think, John, you know this well. We wanted to choose materials that we could feel more comfortable with in terms of fracture rate. So they have 2 years of clinical trial data with their polymer, made me feel comfortable choosing that as a solution for an implant-supported overdenture. I'm not ballsy enough to start doing this in fixed yet, but I think in the future, as these materials get better and as we have more data behind to support it, that we can start utilizing these not just as provisional prosthetics. And as these materials get better, I view that with the fixed world, the materials are so cost-effective to produce. Why not have the patient come back every 6 months to get their whole fixed prosthetic switched out? Because we're able to do that at a material cost that is far less than what we've seen before. If you look at a full arch zirconia prosthetic, it's normally a $1,500 lab bill from your lab. If I can print out a material like this for under $20, $25, it makes sense for me to offer this as sort of a subscription service to my patients potentially in the future, where they're coming back every 6 months to get their cleanings, but they're also getting a brand new prosthetic each time because I have their data on hand. We can just reproduce it, stain and glaze it, go through our processes, and the patient's not gonna have a prosthetic that's gonna fail over time. I think this technology and these materials at the premium rate that they are and at the price point they are allow us to get really innovative with how we approach full arch prosthetics.
Because Trusana bonds so readily to any medium you want, it accommodates any workflow. If you want to mill a denture base, which some labs like to do, it's very easy to bond it with conventional methyl methacrylate-based materials. If you want to bond it to a printed denture base, you use the denture base bonding agent, it bonds to that. Or you saw that beautiful case that was done where you could use Gradia or OptiGlaze to achieve the gingival characterization. Any one of those workflows, Trusana will accommodate.
We've printed the Dentsply-based material and have bonded this into it because that's a high-impact denture-based material. There's only a couple of those that are on the market today. Having a high-impact tooth material to pair with it was something of interest to us. It's not validated in the instructions for use per se. However, going through the bond strength testing that we've seen, it holds up very well. It's essentially a monolithic bond. The materials are very similar, but hopefully they'll come out with a base material in the near future as well that we can have a closed loop system.
Yeah, it's the base material is in development, and we just don't have clearance yet, so I can't talk about it, but that'll be following it.
This is interesting because the finish comes out very, very nicely, and actually we're just adding, in our last iteration, OptiGlaze, and we don't need to do any formidable polishing other than that.
We've used both like the GC materials and the NXDent materials to dress them up. Had no problems with it. Conventional pumice and polishing materials as well work just fine. I am actually a big fan of those like hybrid pumices, right? Some of those where you've got a polishing component built in with the pumice. I do enjoy those materials specifically with the additive. It seems to really help grind things out and speed up the process.
Question was, as the material gets thinner and thinner, how flexible is it down there? We know in ISO testing and others may not be realistic in the technical and clinical world. So when you do this in thinner situations.
Yeah, and I want to be careful. I hang around so many material scientists. I throw words out like elastic. The material is stiff, right? Certainly any material, there reaches a limit where if you get too thin, you lose your toughness for sure. Not any, actually can go thinner than acrylic because acrylic needs the thickness to derive its strength. This is building covalent bonds throughout the whole network. As you're printing, and each layer you on top of it, you're forming, covalent bonds. But you raise a couple of, excellent points about this is the start of a whole system that's urethane based. So in urethanes, Dr. Stansberry's, and he continues to call Steve and me with yet another new molecule and another invention out of the University of Colorado. And think of this as a complete system where we're achieving ceramic-like properties in polymers, which is unprecedented. And we're even able to go the other direction and have things that are elastic like a flexible partial denture. So this Trusana will be a whole family of resins. This was the most logical place to start. But we will tailor make each chemistry to the application. So it's not one size fits all. So there'll be a tooth-borne material, there'll be a tissue-bone partial material, maybe a clear aligner. It's all in the system. Great question.
We've been asking for flexible additive partial materials for a long time. Right now, the convention is primarily through an FDM process, which for dental applications really isn't the resolution or accuracy that we're looking for. So hopefully materials like this and this next generation of material allow us to get those flexible properties without sacrificing long-term, right? A lot of these first generation of flexible partial single resin 3D prints, they do not stand up well.
Well, the issue with milling, and we've had great success with our Duraflex and Zerlux acetyl milling disc. You're still back to the fundamental problem: how do I get the teeth on there? And I still have, it's a mechanical retention. So ultimately, all of us want to get to monolithic multi-material prints. That's closer than you think. It's just not ready today. But that's the ultimate aim: is I want to be able to print the entire prosthesis at once and have it look as good as the analog process. That, to me, is digital dentures 2.0. I feel like and Chris and I have talked about it a lot, and Steve and I talk about it all the time. I think we're still in digital dentures 1.0. And Trusana helps, as Chris said, to at least deliver for the first time a premium tooth with premium aesthetics, but it's not where all of us want to be. Quite yet. It's coming.
Yeah, the thicker it is, it's going to change your translucency, right? Do you guys have a validated wall thickness for this material at this point?
It's imminent.
Yeah. At the incisal edge of a central, we're seeing good transition, right? I would say that it's one of the materials that allows us to have better translucency compared to the opacity that we're seeing in a lot of the predicate, digital denture materials. So I don't know exactly what the metric is per se, John, but for us, the aesthetics look great.
John, the bottom line is, if you look at, you're going to see, and it's already here at the show, you're seeing a lot of nano, ceramic filled materials. What I've noticed, though, is when you get that degree of filler content, there's, some limitations to that, some advantages, but also one thing you lose translucency. Those materials look highly opaque to me. The fascinating thing about this chemistry is that in its base form, it's absolutely water clear. So we're having to add basically opacity to it, but it starts off water clear. That gives us a huge amount of options for optimizing aesthetics. So what we had to do to make a denture tooth that's a monolithic print was not have it be too opaque. Our early teeth were so translucent, you could see through them. And then I got versions that were so opaque, they looked like radio opaque teeth. So you have got to balance both. But at least the underlying chemistry allows you to have something that's optimal translucency. That's a great question.
Have you guys done any radiographs on this material yet? I know we personally haven't. Is it radio opaque?
Do we have it?
Well, actually, it's not.
It's radiolucent?
Radiolucent.
With photopolymers, there's a way to think about it. It's not like when you get a milling disc or a denture tooth that we've cured. They're still in transition for a period of time. So when you put light into it, like in the light box, when you put heat into it, in our case, we use a water bath to anneal the plastic. For the next 24 hours, that still is basically curing to reach its final state. By the time, of course, it reaches the clinic and the patient, it's completely cured. I'm talking about in the dental lab. So all of our shade testing we did was after 24 hours of the final process. And then we use the same standards for Trusana that we do for our denture teeth to have a delta E of 1. So we have Trusana shade guides, and that's all of our testing was we had to make sure that at the end of that 24-hour cycle, after the annealing and the post-curing, every single time was a delta E less than 1. So it's an excellent question. If you took it right out of its green state, it's not its final color. Excellent question.
It's also why it's so important to make sure you use this in a validated system. So they validate curing boxes that work within the wavelength of the material, and because of that, they're able to keep shade consistent. But it's also a good point to mention that annealing process. I think that's something we haven't really touched on. The annealing process with this material it's really the first time I've ever had to use an annealing process with a digital 3D printed material. So after you go through the curing steps, you put the part into a water bath for a certain period of time at a certain
10 minutes,
temperature.
yeah, 10 minutes.
And the whole point of that is to get it to its final mechanical properties. That's one of the reasons that makes this material so unique, is it doesn't have to be like the Dentsply material where you put it in the mouth. It takes 30 seconds for that material to become activated and actually get to its high impact status. That's why they call it BAM, body activated material. This material is activated by the annealing process before you actually put it into the body, which allows it to meet its mechanical properties earlier and stay consistent.
Oh, yeah, sorry, just to jump in. It's not a ceramic. It's absolutely unfilled polymer. Yeah,
That,
none.
yeah, that comes from the name of the company.
Yeah, yeah. Ironically, Steve's company that has the IP is called Hybrid Ceramic, but it has ceramic-like properties, but it's completely unfilled. Yeah. None. Yeah.
So that also allows for you to have more consistent printability, right? When we have ceramic content in the material, very, very commonplace for those ceramic contents to settle to the bottom of the membrane. It'll trash your membrane if you let it sit in there too long, and sometimes you can't even mix these materials or those fillers back in if you're like trying to use an index card or something to try and mix them back in. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's exactly
exactly.
right. Yeah, this is a highly stable but completely unfilled polymer. So it's super strength concrete that doesn't need rebar.
Yeah. It also means that you don't have to continue to have it mixing. Some of these other materials you have to actually have it mixed, like the Flexera material, the IFU is a 12.5-hour turn. And you can't just turn it, you also have to tilt it, right? That helps get those sediments to flow throughout the bottle, make it more homogeneous. Also, the shelf life of this material is going to last a lot longer as well, because we don't have to worry about mixing it so vigorously to get it to print properly.
John, we can fill it, obviously. You know, Jeff Stansberry invented probably most of the composites, direct restoratives that are in the mouth. He understands how to fill it. It's just you're giving up some things to try to chase higher toughness, and we feel like we're such a high standard for toughness and fracture toughness, most importantly, fracture resistance, that adding filler doesn't enhance the overall. But excellent question.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys are on fire this morning. Yeah, good questions.
A question for you. I think, Chris, you mentioned your legal teams have to go through high impact terminology, right? There is a level. What's the genesis of the word premium?
So yeah, how I view premium, again, do they hit those metrics of fit, aesthetic, and fracture resistance? We haven't really had a tooth material that can hit all three of those. Okay. So is it true to shade, right? Does it at least meet the ISO standards for high impact, so that if I market this to the general populace as a high impact material and someone finds out that it's not, right, I don't have to have that legal problem. So a lot of those are just conforming to the industry standards. I think there's some decent arguments that are starting to be made, and I know some people are petitioning to both ISO and to the ADA to change some of these standards because these new materials are pushing the limits and sort of reformulating how we sort of look at a rigid denture-based material. Think that we might see some of that change in the future, but for the short term, probably not. We know that the standards organizations don't like to change very much. But I do believe that there's an argument that can be made now because of these materials. They're not acting, these new polymer chemistries that these guys have come up with and that others are starting to come out with as well, allow us to start looking at these materials in a different type of category.
And I think the word premium translates back to the patient. Even we use that in front of the patient. Do you want a premium denture?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know
Gary-
if it's objective
Well,
or
up to now, a
subjective.
premium tooth, right? I mean, there's plenty of different types of denture teeth that are out there that are considered premium teeth.
Right.
A lot of it has to do with aesthetics and shape, right? So the printed materials have never really been able to match the premium aesthetics of a carded tooth. But we can't use a carded tooth in a true digital workflow because it rules out too many patients as candidates. We need customized tooth solutions. We've been waiting for something that can at least mimic the aesthetics of a carded tooth, and finally we've got premium materials like Trusana that can allow us to do it.
I mean, Gary Meyerson invented the first premium tooth in the 1960s. Dr. Meyerson did. We still make them today in our factory in Trinidad. We have people that hand add characterization on the body. There's 11 different layers. But in the dental lab, who's got time anymore to do anything? So right now, when I look at a Trusana tooth next to our Meyerson special teeth we've been making since the 1960s, I have a hard time telling them apart.
So it's premium.
Premium.
Yep.
And that's challenging with a single resin 3D printing process. Right. I mean, in the future, when we get into the jetting world, I mean, I think we're going to be building teeth in an additive process just like nature would. There'd be a layer for your enamel. There'd be a layer for your dentin.
Do you jet anything now with different
The
colors?
first printer I ever had was a jetting printer,
Okay.
which was a Stratasys printer. Actually, it was Objet at the time, back
Yeah.
in 2009. That's where we did all of our big craniofacial models. I have worked very closely with the Israelis over the last 12 years, trying to push them to come out with tooth-colored resins, and they're still not there yet, right? I think that's a lot to do with the chemistry, and I think that with recent groundbreaking advancements, we're going to see new jetting technologies come to market in the future that allow us to deliver on, the promise of a premium denture.
Great. From my standpoint, it's certainly been a pleasure of the selection here because you have, the inventor, manufacturer, and end user. But also, and I'd never really thought of it, I appreciate affordable care because in clinical studies, you're close to the patient, you watch the patient, you make it, you follow it very closely. And in private practice, you can't do that. As a laboratory, you make something, the dentist says it fails, you may not be able to get that back or find out. But with a DSO like affordable care, they're so close. They make it and they know the patient and you have them back. And you can record that whole travel. Sometimes we lose that in translation or just patient not show up. So I appreciate the feedback, continuing feedback from real life and then, controlled clinical in vitro and vivo studies. And then Dr. Swartout, certainly you rounded out as well. Any other questions on this? I think the call to action, well, let me ask one other thing. We talked a little bit about the FDA, and I think in dentistry, we've always pushed the FDA. For ceramics, they don't even know about some of the things we're doing, so we're always pushing them. But you have to validate each printer or each processing.
Yeah, Gary raises an important point. Is additive manufacturing for all of us? It's not, if I just make a denture tooth, there's nothing more you can do to it. This involves the dental laboratory or the dental practice with an in-office technician into a whole new frontier where you're finishing the medical device. And Chris touched on it earlier, is especially in photopolymers, following, and I'm sounding preachy here, but it's absolutely true, following the manufacturer's instructions have never been more important. I know I grew up in a dental lab. I know that's like, I'll get to the instructions when it doesn't work, but otherwise I'll figure it out. With photopolymers, you don't get to swap stuff out. You don't get to use the cure box that's sitting on the shelf that you got 10 years ago. We have to prove to the FDA we can control the device from beginning to end. So when we validate, for example, with the SIGA, which is, if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's an incredible printer. It's the only printer our polymer scientists want to use. I think it's one of the most intelligently designed printers. Their cure box has the right wavelength to cure our material. That's our workflow, and you can't change it, or else we can't tell you what the physical properties are going to be. So everything we show you that's been independently validated, Gary, you touched on a great point, is based on the same workflow every single time. And frankly, with additive manufacturing, that consistency is essential. The printers are consistent, but the rest of the workflow is just as important.
It's also important to note the FDA is changing consistently. They just issued commentary guidance, of course, on point-of-care manufacturing. Their first ever guidance on additive manufacturing for medical devices wasn't released until 2018. So they're very new to this as well. There is a big gray area right now in the FDA, which is point-of-care manufacturing. You as clinicians can legally 3D print out whatever materials you want in your practice, bond them together to non-conforming workflows, deliver them to your patient, but you're held liable to your state boards, right? So if you're not meeting good standards of care, you can get dinged. But up to this point, there's a big gray area and a loophole of people producing locally because the FDA can't police at a clinical level yet. They can to large groups like us and to big manufacturers. But I think that's going to change. Obviously, the FDA is taking commentary on it right now, so I think we'll see some of those standards change in the very near future.
And are you looking to validate other systems?
Yes, yeah, we obviously can't disclose it, but I think we're a third-party resin company, and we want to work and partner with premium printers to go with our premium resin. So you'll see announcements from us as we form new partnerships to validate our material. I absolutely am an advocate of open source printers. I think, would anyone here buy a milling machine where you only could use one type of material? I think that printing has to move towards more open, allowing you to pick the best resin that works on that printer for whatever application you want. So you'll see us coming out, Gary, and additional printers supported by Henry Schein that are worthy of Trusana, and we're worthy of them.
Perfect. And the shades behind us are the shades of the
there's
tooth
6'2"
material?
shades. Swing by the Meyerson stand. Happy to give you a shade guide. So 6'2". Oh, Jenny, look at right on. Jenny's got them right there. You can grab them on the way out. Bravo, Jenny.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for including me. Thank you all for all your questions and attention.